The desert sun had already claimed her by the time Xavier Steele found her lying motionless beside the rutted trail, her dress torn and face pale as moonlight beneath the layer of dust that coated her skin. He had been riding from his ranch toward San Diego, California on that scorching July afternoon in 1878, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies, when he spotted what he first thought was a pile of discarded clothing 20 yards off the main road. The moment he realized it was a woman, he spurred his horse forward and was off the saddle before the animal had fully stopped, his boots hitting the hard, packed earth with urgency that sent small clouds of dust swirling around his legs. Xavier dropped to his knees beside her, his calloused hand moving to her neck to search for a pulse. Relief flooded through him when he felt the faint flutter beneath his fingertips, though her skin burned with fever that had nothing to do with the brutal California sun beating down on them both. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and spread across the ground like spilled copper. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and when he carefully lifted her eyelid, her eyes had rolled back in her head. Dehydration, he thought immediately, and possibly something more. He looked around the empty landscape, searching for any sign of what had happened to her. There was no horse, no wagon, no belongings scattered about. Just this woman, alone in the middle of nowhere, as if she had simply dropped from the sky. Her dress, though dusty and torn, had once been fine quality, the kind of garment a city woman might wear, not something practical for the harsh desert country. Xavier made his decision in seconds. San Diego was still 8 miles away, but it was the closest town, and this woman needed a doctor immediately. Xavier hurried back to his horse and retrieved his canteen, kneeling beside her again to carefully dribble a small amount of water between her parched lips. She did not respond, did not swallow, and he knew better than to pour more and risk choking her. He would have to get her to town as quickly as possible. At 6'2", and hardened by years of ranch work, Xavier had no trouble lifting her into his arms. She weighed hardly anything, he noticed with concern, far too light for a woman of her height. He secured her as carefully as he could across his saddle, then swung up behind her, cradling her against his chest to keep her from falling. The packhorse's lead rope he tied to his saddle horn, and then he urged his mount into a steady lope toward San Diego. The 8 miles felt like 80. Xavier kept one arm locked around the unconscious woman, feeling her labored breathing against his chest, the heat of her fever seeping through both their clothes. He talked to her as he rode, though she gave no sign of hearing him. He told her she would be fine, that he was getting her help, that she just needed to hold on a little longer. He did not know if he was trying to convince her or himself. The sun blazed overhead without mercy, and he tipped his hat forward to shade her face as much as possible, wishing he had more to offer her than words and the promise of help still miles away. San Diego came into view finally, the scattered buildings and dusty streets a welcome sight. The town had grown considerably in recent years, with the arrival of new settlers and the expansion of the railroad bringing prosperity and civilization to this corner of California. Xavier rode straight down the main street, ignoring the curious stares from townspeople who stopped to watch him pass. He headed directly for Doc Harrison's office, a small whitewashed building near the center of town that served as both clinic and occasional surgery. Xavier pulled his horse to a stop in front of the doctor's office and dismounted carefully, bringing the woman down with him. He kicked open the door without bothering to knock, startling the elderly doctor who had been organizing bottles on a shelf. Doc Harrison turned with a scowl that quickly transformed into concern when he saw what Xavier carried. "Found her out on the trail," Xavier said quickly, moving toward the examination table in the center of the room. "She's burning with fever and hasn't woken. No water by the looks of it. Been out there a while." Doc Harrison, a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed spectacles and gentle hands weathered by decades of frontier medicine, immediately cleared space on the table. "Lay her down here. When did you find her?" "About an hour ago, maybe 8 miles out." Xavier placed her on the table with surprising gentleness for such a large man. Now, in the better light of the doctor's office, he could see more details. Her face, beneath the dust and sun damage, had fine features. There were scrapes on her hands and arms, and her fingernails were broken and bloody, as if she had been clawing at something. Her dress had tears that looked deliberate, not from wear. Doc Harrison was already examining her, his experienced hands moving quickly but carefully. He checked her pulse, her breathing, lifted her eyelids to examine her pupils. "She's severely dehydrated, that much is certain. Probably been without water for at least 2 days, maybe more. This fever, though, that's concerning. Help me get her dress loosened so I can check for injuries." Xavier hesitated only a moment before helping, carefully unfastening the buttons at her collar and sleeves while Doc Harrison examined her arms and neck for injuries. They found bruises, dark purple marks on her wrists that looked suspiciously like finger marks, and more bruising along her collarbone. Xavier felt his jaw tighten. Someone had hurt her. "Looks like she was grabbed, held hard enough to leave marks," Doc Harrison said quietly, echoing Xavier's thoughts. "There's a wound on her side here. Look, her dress is torn and blood-stained. Help me turn her." They found the injury, a deep cut along her ribs that had bled considerably but appeared to have stopped. The wound was inflamed and hot to the touch, the skin around it angry red. "This is infected," Doc Harrison said grimly. "That's where the fever is coming from. This needs cleaning and stitching immediately. Xavier, I'll need your help. Can you stay?" "I'll stay," Xavier said without hesitation. He had found her, and some instinct he could not name told him he needed to see this through. For the next 2 hours, Xavier assisted Doc Harrison as the doctor worked to save the mysterious woman's life. They cleaned the infected wound, a process that would have been agonizing if she had been conscious, and Doc Harrison carefully stitched it closed with neat, practiced movements. They worked cool water between her lips drop by drop, and gradually she began to swallow reflexively, a good sign. Doc Harrison applied poultices to her sunburned skin and bandaged her abraded hands. Through it all, she remained unconscious, lost in whatever dark place her body had retreated to in order to survive. When they had done all they could, Doc Harrison wiped his hands on a clean cloth and regarded his patient with cautious optimism. "She's got a fighting chance now. The next 24 hours will tell us if she's strong enough to beat that infection. She'll need constant watching, though. Someone needs to keep getting water into her, watch for signs the fever is getting worse, change those bandages." "I'll do it," Xavier said. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he knew he meant them. Doc Harrison raised his eyebrows. "You don't even know who she is." "Doesn't matter. Can't leave her alone when she's like this." Xavier pulled up a chair beside the examination table, settling into it with the ease of a man prepared to stay a while. "I'll watch over her until she wakes." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then. I'll have my wife bring over some broth and clean water. Try to get her to drink every hour or so. If that fever spikes or she starts having convulsions, you come get me immediately. I live just next door. I will." Doc Harrison paused at the door. "You're a good man, Xavier Steele. Not many would take on a stranger's trouble like this." After the doctor left, Xavier sat in the quiet office, studying the woman who lay so still on the table. In the fading afternoon light streaming through the window, with her face cleaned of dust and her hair spread out around her head, she looked almost ethereal. He found himself wondering who she was, where she had come from, what had happened to her out there in the desert. The bruises and that knife wound suggested violence, someone who had hurt her deliberately. Had she escaped from something? Or someone? He gently took her hand, careful of the bandages Doc Harrison had wrapped around her abraded fingers. Her hand was small in his, delicate, with long fingers that suggested she had never done hard labor. A lady's hand. Everything about her spoke of refinement, of a life very different from the rough frontier existence he knew. What had brought her to this remote corner of California, so far from whatever world had shaped her? "Who are you?" he murmured quietly. She gave no answer, just continued her shallow breathing, fighting battles he could not see. As evening fell, Doc Harrison's wife, a kind woman named Martha, brought over a pot of beef broth, fresh water, and clean linens. She clucked sympathetically over the injured woman and helped Xavier move her to a small bed in the back room of the clinic where patients sometimes stayed. The bed was narrow but clean, with a real mattress and pillows, far more comfortable than the examination table. Xavier settled into a chair beside the bed, prepared for a long night. The hours passed slowly. Xavier kept his promise, waking from his light dozes every hour to carefully dribble water between her lips. She swallowed it more readily as the night wore on, which he took as a good sign. Twice he changed the cool cloth on her forehead, and once, around midnight, he checked her bandages as Doc Harrison had shown him, relieved to see no fresh bleeding. The fever still raged, though, making her skin hot to the touch, causing her to occasionally whimper or shift restlessly in her sleep. During those long, dark hours, Xavier found his thoughts drifting to his own life, to the ranch that waited for him outside of town, to the solitary existence he had built for himself over the past 5 years. He had come to California from Texas after the war, looking for a fresh start away from the ghosts of his past. He had worked hard, saved his money, and eventually bought a small spread where he raised cattle and horses. It was a good life, an honest life, but a lonely one. He had friends in San Diego, people who knew and respected him, but he had kept himself apart from any deeper connections, telling himself he was content with his independence. But sitting here in the quiet darkness, keeping vigil over this mysterious woman, something stirred in his chest that he had not felt in years. A sense of purpose beyond his daily routines, a connection to another human being that went deeper than casual friendship or business dealings. He barely knew her, did not even know her name, yet he felt responsible for her in a way that went beyond simply being the one who had found her. He wanted her to live, wanted to see her open her eyes and smile, wanted to know her story. The intensity of his feelings surprised him. Dawn broke slowly, painting the sky outside the window in shades of pink and gold. Xavier stood and stretched, his back protesting from the long night in the chair. He moved to the window and looked out at San Diego waking up, the street beginning to fill with early risers going about their business. Behind him, he heard a sound he had been waiting for all night, a soft groan that was different from the unconscious whimpers she had made before. He turned quickly and moved back to the bed. Her eyes were open, wide and confused, the color of dark honey in the morning light. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then slowly turned her head to look at him. Her lips moved, forming words that came out as barely more than a whisper. "Where am I?" Xavier pulled his chair closer and sat down, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "You're in San Diego, California. You're safe. I found you collapsed out on the trail yesterday afternoon and brought you to the doctor. You've been pretty sick, but Doc Harrison says you'll pull through. She stared at him, processing this information with visible effort. I don't remember. I don't remember how I got there. Do you remember your name? For a moment, panic flashed across her face and Xavier thought she might say no. Then her eyes focused and she swallowed hard. Rose Anderson. I'm Xavier Steele. I found you. He reached for the cup of water beside the bed. You need to drink. You've been without water for too long. He helped her sit up slightly, supporting her shoulders with one arm while he held the cup to her lips with the other hand. She drank eagerly, and he had to pull the cup away before she made herself sick. Slowly, he cautioned. Just a little at a time. Rose leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion clear on her face despite having just woken. How long was I out there? Hard to say for certain. By your condition, Doc Harrison thinks at least 2 days without water, maybe more. You've got an infected wound on your side, bruises. Rose, can you tell me what happened to you? Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over and ran down her temples into her hair. I was on a stagecoach from Los Angeles. We were supposed to arrive in San Diego 2 days ago, but we were held up robbers. They stopped the coach and demanded everyone's valuables. The other passengers handed over their things, but I had my mother's wedding ring. It's all I have left of her, and I just couldn't give it to them. Her hand moved unconsciously to her left hand, where Xavier noticed a simple gold band on her ring finger. Somehow, miraculously, she had kept it. One of them got angry when I refused, Rose continued, her voice shaking. He grabbed me, tried to take it by force. I fought him and he cut me with his knife. The driver tried to help and they shot him dead right there. Then they argued about what to do with the rest of us. I heard them saying they should take us back to their camp, and I knew I couldn't let that happen. When they were distracted loading the strongbox from the coach, I ran. Just ran into the desert. One of them chased me for a while, but I kept running even after I couldn't hear him anymore. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and then I walked. I was trying to reach San Diego, but I must have gotten turned around. I remember being so thirsty and so hot, and then nothing after that. Xavier felt rage building in his chest at the thought of what she had endured, the terror she must have felt running for her life through the desert. The other passengers on the coach, what happened to them? I don't know. I don't know if they were hurt or if the robbers took them. I just ran. Does that make me a coward? No, Xavier said firmly. It makes you a survivor. You did what you had to do to stay alive. That took courage, Rose. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection. You stayed with me, all night. Someone had to make sure you kept drinking water, make sure that fever didn't get worse. Doc Harrison needed to sleep sometime. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for finding me, for bringing me here. I would have died out there if you hadn't come along. I'm glad I was on that road yesterday. And he meant it, more than he could express. Despite the circumstances, despite her pain and the violence that had brought her to this point, Xavier could not bring himself to wish he had taken a different route. Doc Harrison arrived shortly after, pleased to find his patient awake and coherent. He examined Rose thoroughly, asking her questions about her pain levels and checking her wound and bandages. The infection is still a concern, he told them both. You're going to need to stay here for at least a few more days, Miss Anderson, until I'm certain that fever is truly broken and that wound is healing properly. You're not out of danger yet. I understand, Rose said quietly. Doctor, I should tell you, I don't have much money. The robbers took my bag with most of what I had. I can pay you something, but not much. Doc Harrison waved his hand dismissively. We'll worry about that when you're well. For now, just focus on getting better. After the doctor left, Xavier remained in his chair beside Rose's bed. She looked at him curiously. Don't you need to get back to whatever you were doing before you found me? You've already done so much. I've got a ranch outside of town, but my foreman can handle things for a few days. I'd like to stay, if you don't mind the company. Make sure you're really on the mend. I don't mind, Rose said softly, and there was something in her eyes, a warmth, a gratitude that went deeper than simple appreciation for his help. Over the next 3 days, Xavier barely left Rose's side. He helped her drink the broth that Martha Harrison brought regularly, changed her bandages under Doc Harrison's supervision, and sat with her during the long hours, talking quietly or simply keeping her company in comfortable silence. Rose grew stronger each day, the fever gradually breaking, the infection responding to the doctor's treatments. Color returned to her face, and she was able to sit up and eventually stand with assistance. During those days, they learned about each other in the way people do when thrown together by circumstance and given time to really talk. Xavier told Rose about his ranch, about coming west after the war, about building something from nothing with his own 2 hands. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to a fever epidemic when he was 16, about the years of drifting before he found his purpose in California. Rose told him about her life in Boston, where she had grown up the only child of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. Her father had died when she was 15, and she had watched her mother work herself to exhaustion trying to keep their small home and put food on the table. When her mother passed away 2 years ago, Rose found herself alone with no close family and very little money. She had worked as a teacher herself, but the pay was poor and she struggled to make ends meet. When she received a letter from a distant cousin in San Diego offering her a position as a governess for his children, she had seen it as a chance for a fresh start, a new life in a new place. I sold everything I owned to buy the ticket west, Rose told Xavier on the 3rd day, when she was feeling well enough to sit in a chair by the window and look out at the sunny street. Everything except my mother's ring and a few letters. I thought I was being so brave, setting out on this grand adventure. Instead, I nearly got killed before I even made it to my destination. You are brave, Xavier said. Most people would have given up out there in the desert. You kept going. I was terrified the entire time. I still have nightmares about it. Last night I dreamed I was running and running, but my legs wouldn't work, and I could hear them coming after me. She shuddered at the memory. Xavier reached over and took her hand without thinking, a gesture that had become natural over the past few days. You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you. Rose looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. Why are you doing this, Xavier? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Yet you've stayed here, helped me, given up your time. Why? It was a question Xavier had been asking himself, and the answer frightened him a little with its intensity. Because from the moment I found you out there, I felt responsible for you. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, wondering if you'd wake up, wanting to know who you were. Because in 3 days, I've come to care about what happens to you more than I've cared about anything in a long time. The words hung in the air between them, more honest than he had intended to be. Rose's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly in surprise. Then slowly, she turned her hand in his so that their palms pressed together, fingers interlacing. I care about you too, she said softly. I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other, but Xavier, when I look at you, I feel safe. I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Xavier felt his heart hammering in his chest. He stood and moved closer to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. Rose, I don't have much. A ranch, a small house, a life that's simple and sometimes hard. But it's honest and it's mine, and if you'll let me, I'd like to share it with you. I know this is fast. I know we should probably wait and be sensible. but I've never been one for wasting time when I know what I want. And I want to be with you. I want to keep you safe and make you smile and build something real with you." Tears gathered in Rose's eyes again, but this time they were happy tears. "I have nothing to offer you. No money, no property, nothing but myself and the skills I have." "That's everything," Xavier said. "That's all I want." She leaned forward and kissed him, a gentle brush of lips that sent electricity through his entire body. When they broke apart, both were smiling, and Xavier felt like the sun had come out after years of clouds. He knew people would say they were crazy, that they barely knew each other, that this was too fast. But he had learned during the war that life was short and uncertain, that tomorrow was never guaranteed. When you found something precious, you held on to it with both hands and refused to let go. Doc Harrison declared Rose well enough to leave his care 2 days later, though he cautioned her to take things slowly and not strain herself. Xavier had already made arrangements. He had sent word to his foreman that he would be delayed a while longer, and he had sent a message to Rose's cousin in San Diego explaining what had happened, and that Rose would not be able to take the governess position as planned due to her injuries. The cousin, a banker named Edward Whitmore, sent a polite reply expressing relief that Rose had survived and wishing her well in her recovery. Xavier took Rose to the town's small hotel, renting her a proper room where she could rest comfortably. He also took her to the general store, where he purchased several new dresses to replace the ruined one she had been wearing, along with other necessities. Rose protested the expense, but Xavier insisted, and eventually she relented with the promise that she would find a way to repay him once she was back on her feet. "You need clothes," he said simply, "and I need to know you have what you need. Let me do this for you, Rose." That evening, they had dinner together at the hotel restaurant, Rose wearing one of her new dresses, a simple but pretty blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. It was their first real meal together, their first time in public as anything more than patient and caretaker. Xavier noticed the curious glances from other diners, the whispers behind hands. San Diego was still a small enough town that a stranger's arrival was noteworthy, especially under the dramatic circumstances of Rose's rescue. After dinner, they walked along the main street in the cool evening air, Rose's hand tucked into the crook of Xavier's arm. She was still weak, but growing stronger each day, and she had insisted she needed fresh air and movement. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the town was settling into its evening rhythms. "Tell me about your ranch," Rose said as they walked. "What's it like?" Xavier smiled, happy to share this part of his life with her. "It's about 5 miles north of town, good grazing land with a creek running through it. The house isn't fancy, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it's solid and keeps out the weather. I've got about 100 head of cattle right now and a dozen horses. I run the place with 3 hired hands, good men who know their work. We supply beef to the town and to the fort east of here. It's a good operation, growing slowly but steadily." "It sounds wonderful," Rose said wistfully. "I grew up in the city, surrounded by buildings and streets. I've always wondered what it would be like to live somewhere with space and sky and freedom. Would you like to see it, the ranch, I mean? When you're feeling stronger, I could take you out there, show you around." Rose looked up at him, her face glowing in the fading light. "I would love that." They spent the next week in San Diego, taking things slowly while Rose regained her strength. Xavier showed her the town, introducing her to the people he knew, the shopkeepers and craftsmen and families who made up the community. Rose charmed everyone she met with her gentle manners and quick intelligence. Martha Harrison took a particular liking to her and invited her for tea several times, treating her like the daughter she had never had. During this time, Xavier and Rose grew closer, their connection deepening from that initial spark into something solid and real. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared interests and values. They both loved to read, though books were precious in Rose's Boston tenement and Xavier's frontier ranch for different reasons. They both believed in hard work and honesty, in treating people fairly regardless of their station. They both wanted something more from life than mere survival. They wanted purpose and meaning and connection. Xavier found himself falling in love, really and truly in love, for the first time in his life. Everything about Rose captivated him, from her quick wit to her kind heart to the way she tilted her head when she was thinking deeply about something. He loved how she never complained about her injuries or her lost belongings, how she looked forward instead of dwelling on what might have been. He loved her courage and her vulnerability, the way she had survived something that would have broken a weaker person. Rose, for her part, found in Xavier something she had never expected to find. Security, yes, and protection, but also respect and partnership. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, listened when she spoke. He made her laugh with his dry humor, and he made her feel cherished in a way she never had before. The life she had imagined for herself, working as a governess for a distant cousin's family, seemed colorless and empty compared to the possibility of a life with this strong, honest man who had literally saved her life and then stayed to win her heart. At the end of the week, when Doc Harrison pronounced Rose fully recovered and able to resume normal activities, Xavier asked her if she was ready to see his ranch. She agreed eagerly, and early the next morning he rented a small buggy from the livery stable and helped her up onto the seat. The morning was cool and pleasant, the brutal heat of summer tempered by ocean breezes, and Rose looked around with interest as they left San Diego behind and headed north into open country. The landscape rolled out before them in gentle hills, covered with golden grass and scattered oak trees. In the distance, mountains rose blue and majestic against the sky. Birds wheeled overhead, and they passed several deer grazing peacefully in the shade of a grove of trees. Rose breathed deeply, filling her lungs with clean air that smelled of earth and growing things, so different from the coal smoke and crowded humanity of Boston. "It's beautiful," she said, her eyes taking in everything. "So open and free. I had no idea California was like this." "It can be harsh," Xavier admitted. "The summers are hot and dry and we don't get much rain. But there's a beauty to it, and the land is good if you know how to work with it instead of against it." They arrived at the ranch in mid-morning, and Xavier helped Rose down from the buggy, watching her face as she took in her surroundings. The house was exactly as he had described it, a simple but well-built structure with a wide porch and a good roof. Nearby were the barn and several corrals where horses stood swishing their tails in the shade. Further out, cattle dotted the golden hills, peaceful in the growing warmth of the day. Xavier's foreman, a weathered man in his 50s named Tom Martinez, came out of the barn to greet them. His eyes went wide when he saw Rose, surprise and curiosity clear on his lined face. Xavier made quick introductions, and Tom tipped his hat respectfully to Rose, his manners as good as any city gentleman's despite his rough appearance. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Anderson. Xavier here has told us about finding you out on the trail. Mighty glad to see you looking so well." "Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Xavier speaks highly of you and the other men. I understand you've kept things running smoothly in his absence." Tom grinned, pleased by the compliment. "Just doing our job, madam. Ranch doesn't stop for anything, you know, but we managed fine. Boss, I should tell you that sorrel mare finally foaled. Pretty little filly with 4 white socks." Xavier's face lit up. When? 3 days ago. Mother and baby both doing well. They're in the back corral if you want to take a look. Xavier looked at Rose. Would you like to see? Rose nodded enthusiastically, and they walked together toward the corrals, Tom heading back to his work in the barn. The back corral held a beautiful sorrel mare and her foal, a delicate creature with a reddish coat and striking white markings on all 4 legs. The foal was nursing, her small tail swishing contentedly. She's perfect, Rose breathed, leaning on the fence rail to watch. I've never seen anything so sweet. First foal from that mare. I've been waiting to see what she'd produce. Looks like she's going to throw quality offspring. Xavier paused, then said, What do you think? Could you see yourself here, living this kind of life? Rose turned to look at him, her expression serious. Xavier, I need to be honest with you. I don't know anything about ranching or horses or any of this. I'm a city girl who taught children their letters and numbers. I can read and write and do sums and sew a straight seam. I can't ride a horse or rope a steer or whatever else needs doing on a ranch. I'd be useless to you. Xavier took both her hands in his, holding them gently. You wouldn't be useless. You'd be my partner, my companion. Yes, ranch life takes skills, but skills can be learned. What matters more is having someone to share it with, someone to make the hard days bearable and the good days better. I'm not asking you to become something you're not, Rose. I'm asking you to be yourself and let me be part of your life. Everything else we'll figure out together. Rose's eyes searched his face, looking for doubt or hesitation and finding none. Are you asking me to marry you, Xavier Steele? I am. I know it's fast. I know people will say we're rushing. But Rose, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I've loved you since you opened your eyes and looked at me that first morning. Maybe even before that, sitting beside your bed all night, willing you to live. I want to marry you, build a life with you, grow old with you. Will you have me? Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks, happy tears that sparkled in the morning sun. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Xavier. I never believed in love at first sight until I met you, but you've shown me it's possible. You've shown me what it means to be truly cared for, truly valued. I want to be your wife more than anything. Xavier pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly for the first time, a deep kiss full of promise and passion and future. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and grinning foolishly at each other. The foal in the corral whinnied, as if offering her congratulations, and they laughed together. They were married 3 weeks later in San Diego's small church, with Doc Harrison standing up as Xavier's witness and Martha Harrison as Rose's. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Rose felt her heart swell with joy and gratitude. She had come west expecting one kind of life and had found something so much better, so much richer than she had ever imagined possible. The townspeople threw them a small celebration at the hotel, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Rose wore a new dress, white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, purchased with money Xavier had earned from selling several horses to the fort. She felt like a princess in it, and the way Xavier looked at her made her feel beautiful despite the lingering marks from her ordeal, the fading bruises and healing cuts that still reminded her how close she had come to death. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, before heading out to the ranch the next morning to begin their married life. Rose was nervous about her new role as a rancher's wife, but Xavier was patient and encouraging, showing her around the property in detail, introducing her to the other ranch hands beyond Tom, and explaining the rhythms and routines of ranch life. Rose threw herself into learning everything she could. She might not be able to rope or brand cattle, but she could keep the house, manage supplies, handle the ranch accounts with her education and head for numbers. She learned to cook for a crew of working men, hearty meals that would sustain them through long days of hard labor. She learned to preserve food for winter, to tend a vegetable garden despite the challenging climate, to mend torn clothing and broken harness. Tom's wife, Elena, who lived in a small house on the ranch property with her husband, became Rose's friend and teacher, showing her the practical skills she would need to thrive in this new life. Most importantly, Rose learned about Xavier, about the man she had married. She learned that he was unfailingly fair with his workers, paying them well and treating them with respect. She learned that he had a quiet sense of humor that came out when he was relaxed and happy. She learned that he was a man of his word, that when he made a promise, he kept it no matter what. She learned that he could be tender and passionate, that marriage meant sharing not just a home but intimacy of body and spirit that left her breathless and amazed. Xavier, for his part, discovered that Rose was everything he had hoped and more. She adapted to ranch life with determination and grace, never complaining about the challenges or the isolation. She brought warmth and life to his house, filling it with small touches that made it feel like a home for the first time. Fresh flowers on the table, curtains at the windows, the smell of bread baking, the sound of her singing as she worked. She managed the household accounts with efficiency that freed him to focus on the actual ranching, and her suggestions for improvements to their operations proved insightful and valuable. But beyond all that, she gave him companionship and love. After years of solitary existence, coming home to Rose made everything better. Sharing his day with her over dinner, hearing about what she had done and telling her about his work, sitting together on the porch in the evening watching the sun set over the hills, these simple moments became the foundation of their happiness. Their first year together was not without challenges. A drought that summer tested their water resources and forced them to drive the cattle to new grazing areas. One of the ranch hands quit without warning, leaving them short-handed during the busiest season. Rose had a bad fall from a horse she was learning to ride, bruising her ribs and terrifying Xavier until Doc Harrison confirmed she would be fine. But they faced each challenge together, supporting each other, and emerged stronger. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Rose discovered she was pregnant. The joy on Xavier's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. He became even more protective, insisting she not overwork herself, hovering until she had to shoo him away with laughing protests that she was pregnant, not made of glass. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and on a cool October day in 1880, Rose gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and strong lungs that could be heard throughout the ranch house. They named him Thomas Edward Steele, after Tom Martinez, who had become like family to them, and Rose's late father. Xavier held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered face, and Rose knew in that moment that her life had come full circle. She had nearly died alone in the desert, but instead she had been found, had been saved, and in saving her, Xavier had somehow saved himself too. They had found in each other the missing pieces of their souls. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Xavier's reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock spread, and they expanded their operation, buying additional land and increasing their herd. Rose took on more responsibilities, handling all the business correspondence and contracts, freeing Xavier to focus on the physical work of ranching that he loved. They made a good team, each contributing their strengths, supporting each other's weaknesses. 3 years after Thomas was born, Rose gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Claire, who had their mother's auburn hair and gentle dispositions. The ranch house rang with children's laughter and the organized chaos of a growing family. Xavier built an addition to the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen so Rose had more space to work. They hired a young woman from town to help with the children and the household tasks, giving Rose time to focus on the increasingly complex business side of the ranch. The years passed in a blur of work and family and love. Xavier taught Thomas to ride as soon as the boy could sit a horse, passing on his knowledge and skills to his eager son. Rose taught all the children to read and write, turning a corner of their bedroom into a small schoolroom where lessons happened every morning. The children grew strong and healthy, thriving in the open air and freedom of the ranch. The stagecoach robbery that had nearly claimed Rose's life was never fully solved, though the stolen strongbox was eventually recovered from a bandit hideout in the mountains. The fate of the other passengers remained unknown, a shadow that occasionally crossed Rose's thoughts, though she tried not to dwell on what might have been. She had survived, and that survival had led her to Xavier and this life, and she could not bring herself to wish any of it had happened differently, despite the trauma and pain. Tom and Alina became like grandparents to the Steele children, doting on them and teaching them both English and Spanish, sharing their heritage and wisdom. The other ranch hands came and went over the years, but a core group remained, loyal to Xavier's fair treatment and good leadership. The ranch became known throughout the region as a good place to work, and they never had trouble finding quality help when they needed it. As the 1880s progressed into the 1890s, California continued to change and grow. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers and more opportunities. San Diego grew from a frontier town into a proper city with schools and churches, and even a library. The wild days of the frontier began to fade, replaced by something more settled and civilized. Xavier and Rose watched these changes with mixed feelings, grateful for the progress while missing some aspects of the simpler times they had known. In 1895, when Thomas was 15 and the twins were 12, the ranch suffered its worst crisis. A wildfire, started by lightning in the dry summer grass, swept across the hills, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Xavier and his crew fought the blaze for 2 days straight, digging fire breaks and beating out flames, while Rose and the children evacuated to town with the most important possessions loaded in wagons. Alina stayed with Rose, both women barely sleeping as they waited for news. When Xavier finally appeared in town, exhausted and covered in soot, Rose flew into his arms with tears of relief. They had saved the ranch, he told her. The house and barn and most of the grazing land were intact. They had lost some fences and a portion of the herd, but nothing that could not be rebuilt or replaced. What mattered was that no one had been seriously hurt. The recovery from the fire brought the community together. Neighbors from surrounding ranches came to help rebuild fences and replace lost livestock. The town raised money to help those affected by the blaze. Xavier and Rose repaid the kindness by opening their home to a family whose ranch had not been as fortunate, housing them for 3 months while they rebuilt. As the century drew to a close, Xavier and Rose celebrated 20 years of marriage surrounded by their children, now nearly grown, and the extended family of friends and workers who had become part of their lives. They stood on their porch at sunset, Xavier's arm around Rose's waist, and looked out over the land they had built together. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked quietly. "Marrying me so quickly, taking on this life?" Rose looked up at him, her face lined now with years of sun and wind and laughter, but still beautiful to him. Never, not once. You saved my life, Xavier, in more ways than one. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me a home. How could I ever regret that? I'm the one who was saved, Xavier said, pulling her closer. I was just existing before I found you, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live. They kissed then, still in love after all these years, the passion tempered now with deep affection and understanding that came from 2 decades of partnership. Behind them, through the open door, they could hear their children laughing at something, the sounds of home and family. Thomas had grown into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with plans to take over the ranch someday. The twins were nearly young women now, Emma dreaming of becoming a teacher like her mother had been, Claire fascinated by horses and wanting to train them professionally. The children's futures stretched bright before them, full of possibilities that their parents had worked so hard to provide. As the new century approached, bringing with it changes neither Xavier nor Rose could fully predict, they faced it together with confidence. They had weathered droughts and fires, hard times and good times, always side by side. Their love, forged in the crucible of crisis and tested by the challenges of daily life, had proven unbreakable. Years continued to pass, and the ranch grew into one of the most respected operations in the region. Thomas married a sweet-natured woman named Sarah from San Diego and brought her home to the ranch, building a house nearby so he could work alongside his father. Emma went away to school and returned as a certified teacher, opening a small school on the ranch for the children of the workers. Claire, true to her passion, became a skilled horse trainer whose reputation spread throughout California. In 1908, Xavier and Rose celebrated their 30th anniversary with a party that drew people from all over the county. At 60 years old, Xavier's hair had gone silver and his face was deeply lined, but he was still strong and vital, still working the ranch every day. Rose, at 52, had aged gracefully, her auburn hair streaked with white, her hands showing the marks of years of work, but her eyes still bright with intelligence and warmth. Their grandchildren, Thomas and Sarah's 3 boys, ran wild through the celebration, full of energy and joy. Xavier watched them with satisfaction, seeing the continuation of everything he and Rose had built together. The ranch would go on after they were gone, passed down through generations, a legacy of hard work and love. That evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Xavier and Rose sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, the night air cool and pleasant. Rose leaned her head on Xavier's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. 30 years, Rose murmured. It feels like yesterday that you found me in the desert and also like we've been together forever. I remember every detail of that day, Xavier said. Seeing you lying there, thinking I might be too late, carrying you to town, willing you to hold on, sitting beside your bed, watching you breathe, hoping you'd wake up. Best day of my life finding you. Best day of mine too, though I didn't know it at the time. Rose lifted her head to look at him. I was lost, Xavier, not just in the desert, but in my life. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted. You helped me find myself. You gave me a place to belong. We found each other, Xavier corrected. That's what matters. 2 lost souls who somehow found exactly what they needed when they needed it most. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance, the whisper of wind through the grass, the soft hoot of an owl. This land had become Rose's home in a way Boston never had, and Xavier's roots had grown even deeper with her by his side. I love you, Rose said finally. I've said it 1,000,000 times, but I'll never stop saying it. I love you, Xavier Steele, with everything I am. I love you too, Rose. Always have, always will, until my last breath and beyond. They kissed again under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The road that had led them to each other had been hard, marked by violence and suffering and struggle, but it had brought them to this moment, to this life, and neither would change a single step of the journey. The ranch house behind them stood solid and strong, filled with memories of laughter and tears, triumphs and challenges, all the moments that make up a life well lived. The land stretched out before them, golden in the moonlight, productive and thriving under their stewardship. Their family, blood and chosen, surrounded them with love and support. Everything they had dreamed of during those early days, when Xavier kept vigil at Rose's bedside and Rose struggled back to consciousness and life, had come to pass and more. As they finally rose to go inside, Xavier took Rose's hand and she squeezed his fingers gently, a gesture of connection and affection that had become second nature over 3 decades together. They walked through their home, checking that doors were locked and lamps extinguished, moving with the practiced ease of long familiarity. In their bedroom, they helped each other prepare for sleep, another intimate ritual of their shared life. Lying in bed together, Rose's head on Xavier's chest, his arms around her, they drifted toward sleep peacefully. Neither feared the future because they faced it together, as they had faced everything since that day on the desert road when fate had brought them together in the most unlikely of circumstances. The years that followed brought their own joys and sorrows, as all lives must. They watched their children grow and build their own families, extending the Steele legacy into another generation. They weathered economic downturns and celebrated boom years. They dealt with illness and injury, the inevitable challenges of aging bodies. Through it all, they remained each other's anchor and shelter. Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1920 at the age of 72, his hand in Rose's, his last words a whispered declaration of love. Rose grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together, in memories of 52 years of marriage that had been richer and fuller than she had ever imagined possible. Rose lived another 8 years, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and family until the end. She taught her great-grandchildren to read, just as she had taught their parents and grandparents. She told them stories of the old days, of the Wild West when their great-grandfather had found her dying in the desert and saved her life. She made sure they understood that love was worth fighting for, that family was everything, that hard work and honesty would carry them through any challenge. When Rose died in 1928 at the age of 72, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Xavier had created, her last thoughts were of that moment when she had opened her eyes to find a stranger looking down at her with concern and kindness in his dark eyes. That stranger had become her whole world, had given her everything that mattered, and she went to her final rest with gratitude and peace in her heart. The Steele Ranch continued on, passed from Thomas to his sons and eventually to their children, generation after generation working the land that Xavier and Rose had built together. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original structure remained, carefully preserved, a monument to the beginning of it all. In the front room, prominently displayed, hung a painting of Xavier and Rose from their 50th anniversary, their faces lined with age but their eyes still bright with love for each other. Their story became part of the family legacy, told and retold with pride. The romance of it captured imaginations, the idea that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that a moment of compassion and courage could change the course of lives. Young couples in the family would visit Xavier and Rose's graves side by side in the San Diego cemetery, paying their respects and asking for the same kind of lasting love their ancestors had found. But beyond the romance, beyond the drama of the rescue and the whirlwind courtship, what Xavier and Rose had really built was a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering commitment. They had chosen each other every single day for more than 50 years, through good times and bad, through challenges that might have torn apart a less solid union. Their love had been tested by fire, literally and figuratively, and had emerged stronger each time. The desert road where Xavier found Rose was paved over eventually, lost to progress and modernization. But the impact of that moment rippled forward through time in the lives of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who existed, because a cowboy stopped to help a dying stranger and stayed until she woke. Because a woman looked up into the eyes of her rescuer and saw not just safety but possibility. Because two people from completely different worlds took a leap of faith and built something beautiful together. Their love story, born in desperation and crisis, nurtured through dedication and daily choice, had blossomed into something that transcended their individual lives. It became the foundation of a family, the bedrock of a successful enterprise, the inspiration for generations who followed. And it all started with one man who refused to ride past someone in need, who carried her to town and stayed until she woke, and then stayed for the rest of their lives because in saving her, he had found the missing piece of his own soul. In the end, that is what love truly is, not the grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those have their place, but the choice to stay, to support, to care for another person day after day, year after year, through everything life throws at you. Xavier and Rose understood this instinctively, and it made all the difference. Their love was not easy, but it was real, and it was worth every challenge, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt or fear. They had found each other when both were lost, and together they had found their way home,